Okay, folks. Right. As much as it pains me to turn off Jackie Wilson mid flow, I think we'll make a start, and people can filter in as they come along. So welcome and thank you very much for showing up and turning up to this. So my name's Gethin, and I'm one of the senior lecturers over in the education department at the University of Chester. Now, this is part of a larger seminar series organised by Steve Lambert. Steve's unfortunately he's been pulled in to talk to the boss, I think. So he's hoping to join us after about half an hour or so, depending how long the boss keeps him for. But the purposefulness of this, from Steve's point of view, was to sort of to try and showcase some ideas and to try and see if we can forge some links out in the community, whether that's in other departments at the university or whether that's people who are out in industry or out in the field that might apply around this. And so so the title I went for in the end with this is Teaching and Managing Resilience, Opportunities for Personal Growth through Challenge. And I suppose a little bit about me to start with. I've already said that my job's within ITE, so predominantly what I spend most of my time doing is helping people to become teachers. And that's I was a former PE teacher back in the day, and because of that, I don't know whether it's a PE teacher thing, but we always seem to feel a little bit less valued, I think, than other more academic members of staff, and often we're sort of cowering in the back. And here I am, find myself presenting for you guys. Now we do research, and we've had I've had 3 papers. Academic papers published so far, all around the field of coaching and mentoring with my colleagues Steve Tone and Dr. Luke Jones. I'm also doing a PhD in predominantly looking at primary physical education and the different groups of people that go in and teach that, and the differences between what's happening in Wales compared with what's happening in England. So I think Steve thought, when he asked me to do this, Geth will present something on mentoring or coaching. And I decided not to do that. What I've decided to do instead is go down a complete and utter rabbit hole of something that I just find really interesting, which means consequently I'm well out of my comfort zone. I might get some things wrong, and if there are some experts here amongst you in these particular fields who can say, "Oh, actually, Geth, that you misinterpreted that a little bit," absolutely fine. But this, so I'm delving into fields that are outside my area of expertise. I'm going into psychology. I'm going into the philosophy of things. PE I'm okay with. Sport I'm relatively okay with. Outdoor ed, yeah, feel pretty confident with that. So but this is, I want to make you aware from the beginning that as much as I should be feeling like this guy here, what I'm actually feeling like at the moment is this guy here, which is basically Shorts Monkey, back to when I was first teaching PE in the staff room with the other members of staff. So the hope with this is I could just show you my thinking, show you where I'm at. But at the moment, my thinking is like this background that I've got here. It's like this ball of wool. I've got all these little strands of ideas of different things that are going on that I'm trying to make sense of. So consequently, what I've got here is some incomplete thinking, and I'm hoping actually that's where some of you are going to come in. That's where some of you are going to be able to say, all right, I'm out in industry, this is where I think I can contribute, or I'm in the psychology department, or I'm in the philosophy department, and this is where I think I can help. Or actually I'm none of those things. I'm just someone who's interested in this as well. What can we do? What can we collaborate on? And so the key words, the key things I'm interested in exploring with you today is one of the most important words I think has come out for me has been resilience, and I'll go through why that is the case a little bit later on. I can't get away from physical education. Doesn't matter what I do. It's sort of in me. It's there. It's my training. It's my vocation. But part of what I've found when I've been reading about resilience and when I'm teaching others to teach physical education, we talk about comfort zones. We talk about outdoor ed. We delve a little bit into psychology, which then leads us into things like stress-related growth. With a new body of literature that's coming out within PE about being trauma aware, models of instruction. Those of you that are from the field will know that the work of Mike Metzeler, David Kirk, Ash Casey, all of those guys is I can't escape that. I can't escape this idea of there being stressors. I can't get away from challenge. or growth mindsets. You can't turn a corner without finding growth mindsets at the moment. And that's led me into looking at things to do with neurology, well out of my comfort zone. I am no neurologist, that's for sure. But the philosophy side of things, with the virtue ethics and the primary education and the national curriculum for England, the national curriculum for Wales, are all these different strands that I'm trying to pull apart and maybe bring back together into something that looks a bit more coherent. And of course, the day job, which is initial teacher education. And how do all of these ideas, all of these concepts, all of these domains fit together and help, and might go about helping teachers? That's what I want to try and explore with you. So often when I talk about anything to do with education, I'll start with the different national curriculums that we're involved with, and these are extracts from the national curriculum for England, and the physical education part of that, and the new national curriculum for Wales, which is currently being implemented, ready for use in 2022, and you can hopefully see from the aims and the what matters statements from Wales, the different paths that these curriculi, I should say, are about to take either way, and very much when the national curriculum in England was brought in 2014, it was very much a shift from the one that we'd had in 2008 within PE, where it was talking a lot more about competitive sport, and with that bring these questions about resilience and comfort zones and character, and the new national curriculum for Wales going in a very different direction, focusing further on health and well-being, and consequently some of the terminology that we're going to get into, some of the philosophy that we're going to try and get into at least. So of these documents then, I've just picked out some bits and bobs from the national curriculum for England, funnily enough from the section on English language rather than PE for the first two bits. And this is from the relationships and sex education guidance that's just come out in 2019 as well. So on the English side, you can see the words that I've highlighted there. Compare that with what's happening over in Wales, where these are the what matters statements. So a little bit like aims in that sense from the Welsh perspective. And these are the words, the character and resilience. And I keep seeing these words coming up in policy documents and in visions that schools and higher education institutions have. And yet the understanding about what that word resilience in particular and what character might mean are a little bit under thought through, that's for sure. And so, because it was grinding at me, because it was bugging me, I decided to sort of dive into this rabbit hole and see what I could find out about it. So that led me to doing a bit of reading. So all of the slides you can see up here, and I'm not going to do all of them, don't worry, all represent a research paper that I found that has those keywords within them. And consequently, I'm delving outside of strictly the education field, because often it's not thought through in education perhaps as well as it could be or should be. It tends to be stuck into documents, stuck into policy documents, and without necessarily having an understanding or an agreement about what some of these terms might mean. So I'm starting off with this idea of resilience to begin with. We're not going to do all of the reading I've done, but I'm going to try and get at a summary of that. So I found myself within the psychology literature, straight psychology to an extent, and the first paper that often comes up, and I've structured all of the slides in a similar sort of way to try and help myself map this more than for an audience really, which is just to have the reference at the top, a little snapshot of the paper to try and recall what it was about, and then a little bit of a label at the bottom there, and you can't go far in the field of psychology, or indeed within educational psychology or education broadly, without Carol Dweck's name popping up, and how she's sort of not infiltrated, is the wrong word. She's been a massive player when it comes to this idea of growth mindsets. Now, like them or loathe them when it comes to this idea of growth mindsets. The research is not as comprehensive as some schools have taken on. There's a massive double meta-analysis, if such a thing exists, by Sisk and others, if you're interested, which sort of looks at all of the different research that was out there about growth mindsets. And but this is the paper that came up first. So this is where I was starting from, with some of the research I was trying to find. And the claim that's made by Jaeger and Dweck is that resilience is essential, that impacts on the mindsets can have an impact on the capacity to be resilient. They were doing this with challenging maths research, and they were talking about levels of aggression and stress, and enhancing school performance. Now, whether or not this is something that schools should be adhering to, we have growth mindset schools now, and visions often include things like growth mindsets. I like what Dylan Williams says about it, which is, okay, growth mindsets might not work for all your pupils, but it doesn't cost anything really to implement it, and it might be helpful for some of them, so you might as well do it. And so in that, if you take in that sort of philosophy, then it perhaps it is something worthwhile. But it's there in the mainstream psychology literature, and hence why I, as a shorts monkey, came across it, I suppose. And then I sort of delved a bit further into some of the keywords around resilience, and Southwick and Charney in this case, and this was in the American Association for Advancements of Science. It's this journal, and I found this really helpful when I was reading it, because it spelt out this idea of resilience, and the key things I took from it is that the responses to stresses, the responses to trauma, because often the psychology literature will look at trauma. There's a whole field around traumatology that you can get into, and post-traumatic stress disorder and what have you. And what this was really helpful for me was we were going through the types of therapeutic interventions which might help protect and be protective factors for a positive response to adversity. And they're also mentioning some of the risk factors that might make you have a less of a positive response to when something goes wrong. And so they go through the cognitive stuff, the emotional regulation stuff, the social side of things, how your physical health and your sleep can be important, as well as neurobiology. So again, I'm getting a lay understanding of the type of field that I'm into here, but they're suggesting the things that might help when it comes to resilience being things like cognitive behavioral therapy, good sleep, mindfulness training, those sorts of things. And so this is out there, this exists, and this was helping me to an extent trying to make sense of where I was at with this. And still within the psychology literature, and this is more recently, that I found this paper from Bennett et al. Really helpful in the Journal of Evaluation in Clinical Practice, because they took us through how that concept of resilience has evolved right through from the ecology literature. I found a paper within the production literature which is talking about companies being resilient. I'm not showing you that one this time, but all the way through to the child psychology and the biopsychosocial research that's out there. And what the suggestion is that resilience in the face of adversity is a human experience that leads to better health mentally and physically. So this being resilient is something desirable. It's something that we'd like to be able to do, but it's also a common response to when things go wrong. And individuals are going to have differences in terms of their emotional capacity, their coping skills, their social capital, all of those things. But and what they then go into explain is that there are some interventions out there which have shown to be quite helpful for improving the way that people might react to adversity, and consequently likely to have a response that is considered to be resilient. But they go on in that paper to say, actually, the things that might affect resilience the most are maybe the social cultural things that are perhaps are there perhaps more policy-driven things that the government do that are going to affect the situation that people find themselves in? And the charge that they give in this paper is that we should be trying to become advocates for laws and policies that are going to support the most vulnerable in our society. And so this resilience thing, which I was thinking was purely a what are you going to do in the face of adversity, is actually a broader concept than that. That's actually used in lots of different ways and is multifaceted. And again, as a lay person in this, it's sort of it made my head boggle for a long time. Still is making my head boggle to an extent. And so I wound up with this article from Crane, and the summary I sort of made of this paper that I found within the Anxiety, Stress and Coping journal was about how a stressor followed by some reflection might be something helpful to make you have more of a resilient response. And they've got this model that you can see on your screen there, and the different things that might impact upon the type of response that you're going to have. Now, this model perhaps isn't my favorite of the ones that I came across. That my favorite is actually one from the Neurology, which I'm going to show you a bit later on. But what the suggestion here was from Crane and others is they were trying to get you to move beyond a harm reduction approach and actually see how individuals can use stressors and adversity to make a more resilient, strengthening reaction possible, and opportunities that are there to make that happen. And so they've got this systematic self-reflection model, which I took on board as I was going through with me so far, I hope. Okay, there's more to come, hence the ball of wool. So I then found myself down this the sports psychology literature, and Sarker and Fletcher had a couple of papers which I think were worth were notable and worth looking at. So in the psychology literature, but very much with a focus on sport. And one thing I've noticed from reading some of the sport psychology literature is they feel this need to measure everything, which they're sports scientists, of course. They want to measure things, particularly in academic papers. But the main things that Sarker and Fletcher identified worth measuring from their point of view was different adversities, how positive adaptation happens, how the protective factors have an influence, and where. But one thing I picked out from it was they were talking about personally meaningful activities. Now, those of you that are from the physical education realm, same as me, will know that there's a body of literature, developing body of literature from Steph Benny, from Tim Fletcher, from Deirdre Cronin, that's talking about meaningfulness based on the work of Scott Kretschmer, and they're talking about meaningfulness within physical education. And so I'm starting to see some links to my field, which I started to feel a little bit more comfortable about. And perhaps the other thing that, as well as the other notes that are there, which are at the bottom in small, more for my benefit, I think, than yours, but is that they were talking about things being context specific, and consequently resilience perhaps being a context specific, not something generic that can be applied everywhere. The second paper from Sarker and Fletcher was more of a talking about how athletes might go about responding to and being resilient within their field, and reviewing how athletes respond to stresses, and specifically they were looking at the types of stresses that they might find within their sport. And so they categorized these into competitive, organizational, and personal, but as well talking about the different factors that might help to protect, the protective factors that might help to protect them from having a negative response to those stresses. And one of many papers that picked out the social support, that social side of things being a really important factor as far as having a good response to and a resilient response to when adversity strikes. And so it added along with the one from Ghali, and this one's Ghali and Gonzalez, but there's also papers from Ghali and Reel that I found fascinating as well to read. And again, this is one in a sport context, and this was helpful for me, I think, as far as future research goes, because it was just outlining the different ways that we can get at and get at the types of research that we can do, I should say, to get at that concept of resilience. And what they've picked out is are the experimental designs, and as well as more qualitative interviews, which is predominantly the type of research that I've been involved with so far, has all been in that area, in the qualitative, trying to, almost an inductive thing, trying to find out what's going on from the perspectives of the participants. And then I landed probably on the most important field and the most important area as far as my understanding went, and it came to the concept of resilience. And J.S. Russell's piece, which was a scholarly lecture, which was in the Journal of the Philosophy of Sport, probably got me thinking about how to position the idea of resilience more than any other paper that I read. And it's so much so that I've got 4 bits on this, because I couldn't leave anything out, because I think it tells the story so well. And basically, Russell in this philosophical paper, and if you've read philosophical papers, they don't leave any stone unturned. The philosophers, they will give you a full and thorough explanation as to how they've landed up at this trail of thought, and I think I quite like that, because my thinking is so modelled and incomplete. Now, so he starts off by stating that there's psychological literature out there, but there isn't really a clear agreement as to what resilience refers to. There's no philosophical literature out there, certainly at the time of writing, at least, and consequently, researchers are focused on individuals, or they're focused on communities, and attempts to respond to big tragic events that have happened, and how to return to normal function, which chimes with what the sort of dictionary definition of resilience is, and the suggestion from Russell is that definition is too narrow, because there might be something more than that going on when it comes to resilience. Now, the next part then goes on to say about that you can have a continuum of responses, and you can have a continuum of the types of setbacks that you might come across. They can be completely mundane, day-to-day things, or they can be considerable, profoundly tragic things. And so to discuss and talk about it in terms of an ability to adapt to adversity might be helpful, and not just returning to the pre-adversity state, which is what the dictionary definition about resilience suggests. It can mean developing beyond that. Now, there's a body of literature then within the psychology field all about stress-related growth, on post-traumatic growth, and the focus perhaps being on when things go seriously wrong, what's your response going to be to that. And Russell then goes on to say that perhaps actually being resilient, being virtuous and resilient can have or being resilient as a virtue, is what he goes on to say. It can make you better adapted for growth when trauma happens. And so it's not merely being better adapted to responding to adversity, it's actually being better at growing. It took me ages to think about that and get my head, and I'm still not quite sure I've got my head around that entirely, but that's perhaps why I'm not a philosopher, I don't know. But so it can't be cleanly separated from post-traumatic growth or from stress-related growth, and so consequently we need to think about those things together and perhaps try and work out where they are the same and where they're not the same. So it's more than simply overcoming any old challenge or any old stress. It seems to require a particular type of setback, but because people's conceptions of a setback are different. What might be showing resilience to one person might not be showing resilience to another, and consequently, it's difficult to make those distinctions in my view. Certainly, so it can't just be any old challenge or stress, and actually being further away from the desired goal, desired task might be something to think about. And then my thoughts were then, does that link to work that I do with comfort zones, with trying to push people or help people to move beyond their comfort zones? Is that something that teachers do every day, trying to move pupils beyond their comfort zones? I'm not sure, I don't know, but it's certainly adapt positively to significant adversity, and because that adversity can be deemed significant or insignificant by individuals, or is there something collective that we can call that was definitely resilience, that definitely wasn't? I'm not sure. I'm happy to say I'm not sure. And so, Russell goes on to talk about, Aristotle goes on to talk about virtues and different, and whether we should consider resilience to be a virtue rather than just something that happens. But virtues, according to Aristotle, are fragile and not necessarily available to everyone. And is the ability to make correct choices and plan wisely and cope with significant adversity showing resilience. And it's vague in that sense, but what he certainly concludes at the end is that if we're trying to shelter people from adversity or the need to be resilient, it's futile, it's counterproductive, because it's going to happen eventually. And so that feeds directly for me into my day-to-day job when I'm training teachers is, hang on, do I need to be getting them to think about this a little bit more? Because at the moment, or am I letting them fly blind into these types of issues, these types of debate, or is it necessary even? So if we're going to call resilience a central human virtue that children and others need to learn by confronting adversity, we need to think of a way of doing that. And that opens up all kinds of difficulties and issues and ways of going about doing it, perhaps. So I was exhausted after reading the philosophy paper, and still am a little bit exhausted by it because it's thick, it's heavy. But I ended up as well in the stress-related growth literature. I'm not going to go through each of these papers, but I looked at the Galilean Reel one I've had since I used to work at Edge Hill, which was well over 6 years ago. And so I had it the year after it came out in 2013. So it's been sitting in my files, waiting to be used for something. And I think I found a way of trying to link it in and get it in. So the papers here, some of them are from the sports psychology literature. Some of them are more of the straight psychology literature. But looking at that one from Dolber and others is about an intervention that they did. But I loved the title of the Galilean Reel one, which was, it was hard, but it was good. And some of the findings that they had from that one about promoting opportunities for individuals to demonstrate those characteristics, but perhaps that's for another day. I wanted to bring it back closer to my field, which was within psychology, which was in outdoor ed, which was in physical education. But before I could go there, I ended up with this wonderful paper from the team up in Leeds Met, which is now called Leeds Beckett, of course, which was John Allen and the team there. And again, this gets two loads of paper, and it was in the Australian Journal of Outdoor Education, so strictly within the outdoor ed literature. But as a paper, it was going through the multi-dimensional construct that is resilience, and they talked early on in the paper about how there's this idea of controlled dissonance that had looked at resilience, so dissonance being the Festinger version of that, so cognitive dissonance, the stress inoculation side of it, the strength-based learning stuff that some of you may be really familiar with, and how that might be helpful for education. But the second part of the paper, and it linked to neurology, and the second part of the paper was all about the neurology of how that happens out in the outdoor ed, and I thought it was a fantastic paper for me to get my head around. And so they very briefly at the beginning talk about the malleability of the brain and how neurogenesis, which is the growth of neural tissue, and neuroplasticity, which is the rewiring of things, make up how the brain operates. I'm no neurologist. I am no neurologist. So it was helpful how they went about explaining how that process happens. But I'm out of my depth here, so I welcome any comments or thoughts if there's any neurologists in the room. But what they talked about then in the paper was building capacity for dealing with threats and vulnerabilities, and drawing upon the strengths that you have in order to combat those. And the key message I got from this was about scaling. It was about making sure, from an outdoor ed instructor's perspective, that if we're going to if we're going to put participants in the outdoor ed field, at least through things that are going to cause stress or going to cause emotional distress, that they need to be scaled according to the capacity that the individuals who are participating have. And that scaling is going to make it meaningful. And we're back to that word again that I was familiar with, which was meaningfulness. There's got a little clip of the brain developing neurogenesis and neuroplasticity there for you, just in case there are any people about. And so within that neurology field, and I didn't spend long here because I came across this quite early on and I liked it. And whether I've done it justice, I don't know, but the suggestion here from Ord and others, which is in the Neuropsychiatry and Clinical Neurosciences journal, way out of my comfort zone again, was they presented this cycle, which I like, and I think it summarizes what resilience is about and incorporates what Russell was talking about in terms of we can't separate it from stress-related growth to an extent. And so it's the importance of moderately stressful, tolerable stress in terms of our task setting, which is similar to what Alan and others were saying about the scaling thing. And events that have little or no stress are not going to produce resilience building experiences, and the ones that are too stressful are going to be toxic and consequently may overwhelm and likely will overwhelm the infrastructure that individuals have, or indeed the infrastructure that societies might have to take on the work of Southwick from earlier on. So hopefully you can see here on the diagram that they produced that there is and it's happening over here, is there's a stressful event, there's an adjustment process which is modulated by these sorts of factors in the green and in the red, and then there will be one of three likely outcomes: either growth, or you'll recover back to where you were, or there's going to be a problem, there's going to be some impairment there, and your capacity to have a recovery response or a growth response is going to depend on the type of stressful event, but it's also going to depend on the protective factors that we talked about earlier within the psychology literature. So things that you might have done in terms of mindfulness training or cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as your gene environment, your temperament, your personality, are all going to have effects on that. So I really liked this. I really like this model as a way of thinking about how little bits or not insignificant bits of stress, but the appropriate amount of stress is going to allow opportunities for growth. And from a teacher's point of view, that brings to mind the type of practice that teachers are doing day in, day out. They're micro-stressing essentially their pupils every day. They're giving them little challenges every day. And how often do they not give them enough challenge? And how often do they give them too much? They become overwhelmed, and consequently we end up with impairments or with problems. So I was into neurology all of a sudden. And that then brought me back to the teaching, brought me back to comfort zones, brought me back to this idea of challenge by choice. And I felt a bit more comfortable back in the outdoor ed literature and in the PE literature, at least, because that's around my field. And so this wonderful paper from Mike Brown from back in 2008, I couldn't ignore. Again, one I've had for a long time. And what Mike Brown talks about in this, if I just do it quickly, I'm just conscious of time, is that this idea of a comfort zone is often used by outdoor ed instructors as a model of practice, and they talk to their participants about it beforehand. And Mike Brown suggesting that might not necessarily be a good idea, and perhaps we need to reframe the comfort zone model more as a metaphor to talk about afterwards, rather than something that we're deliberately trying to do when we're planning our programming in outdoor ed. And so, deliberately over-exaggerating risk is another thing that came from that literature. Now, the one from Singh Walia was an interesting one because it wasn't peer-reviewed, and it was in the Journal of Outdoor Education. And I tried to chase up Singh Walia, but he seems to have gone off the map a little bit in terms of academia, but he was discussing this idea of challenge by choice, and I'll give you my conclusions as to what I think about challenge by choice a bit further down, because it's in the PE literature, it's in the outdoor ed literature as a bit of a pillar, really. So I think perhaps the best way to show this is with the diagram. So let me just see if I can zoom to this bottom section here. I can, and what Singwali is suggesting here is that rather than pushing people outside of their comfort zones to what is unknown, what is unsafe, what is unfamiliar, is we're trying to push the comfort zone from inside rather than chucking them in the deep end, essentially. So it's a kind way of thinking about how we program and structure our outdoor adventurous education experiences. But I wonder, so is there a way of incorporating that into introducing stressors to the challenges that teachers give to pupils or outdoor ed instructors give to their participants? I think there might be something there that's worth considering. Now, within the outdoor education field, there is already a model of practice about outdoor education that's been proposed. And it was Williams and Wainwright had these two papers in 2016. Very much, those of you that are from the PE field will know that there's the work of Mike Metzeler, it's Ash Casey and David Kirk, and this is very much following a curriculum model rather than a model of instruction. Now, those of you outside of the field, that won't make much sense, but there's a key difference between the two there. I'm conscious as well of treading on the toes of my friend of Graham French, who's over in Bangor, who's doing his PhD based around trying to implement this model. But I think that there might be, if we're doing challenge by choice, which is what this model says, is that going to be sufficient stress to lead to a resilient response, which is what we see in the curriculum? And I don't know whether those two things are compatible or whether there's a discord there between them. And some of the key concerns that they bring up, which is down in this box here, are some of the issues that I have with it being a curriculum model rather than being a model of instruction. But that's perhaps a different lecture for a different day. But where I am comfortable, where I do feel comfortable, is with the body of literature around meaningful PE. And I said, and those meaningful words kept on cropping up in the other fields as well. And meaningful PE is the work, as I said before, of Steph Benny, Deirdre Nicroni, Tim Fletcher, and others, Andy Vassie. There's a big body of literature a recent body of literature coming out about it within the PE field. And I suppose the links that I wanted to try and pull out from this paper, which is Steph Benny's literature review. There have been, more investigations into this since. But what the suggestion here from Steph Benny and others is actually that they're advocating, again, it's the social interaction, it's appropriate challenge, mostly challenge by choice, which is number 2 on there, that there's fun, that there's motor competence, that it's personally relevant to them, which will then hopefully lead to delight. But the issue I have with this sometimes is if we're going to constantly give the pupils choice in what they do, there are some times where they have an experience that didn't feel positive at the time, but actually they see it as meaningful once they've had time to reflect on it, or even longer term. They say, oh yeah, that was really hard at the time, but actually I'm better for it later down the line. And that's a difficult conundrum perhaps for teachers to get their heads around. And so in order to make sense of that, I think that we need to start thinking about things in longer term. And a deeper spectrum of meaningfulness is going to get at that delight. And that's what Kretschmer's certainly getting at. All right. So then I end up within PE, I end up back within outdoor ed. Perhaps I could summarize these rather than go through each one, but there was work there about facilitating positive interpersonal relationships and trying to minimize detrimental impact. The work from Andy Brooks. There was 2 papers there about how there's no such thing as character building in outdoor ed. You can't build character in outdoor ed. It's a longer term process. You can have situations where you can show good character. So you can show that a brave act, but that doesn't necessarily make you brave across the board. quite deep philosophical stuff, and they're talking about he's talking about change, and changing of personality traits can't happen on an outdoor ed a week away. That's not something that can happen. And then that got me thinking in terms of philosophy about the differences between change, between transformation, and between metamorphosis. All slightly different things. Does there a paper to be written around the differences between those things? And there's a paper there from Lupu about higher education and how physical education was beneficial for resilient responses, and maybe the one to focus in on for the PE teachers amongst you, or the trainee PE teachers amongst you, is the one from Tom Quarmby and Rachel Sanford and Ollie Hooper and the others, about being trauma aware in how we go about doing our teaching, and how do we reconcile the need for stressors to be not insignificant with being trauma aware. And I think it was Rachel Stanford on Ash Casey's podcast a couple of weeks ago, talking about the summary of this paper being, it's mostly good practice that you would do anyway, but we need to think about not doing any harm. And that's a difficult thing to reconcile when you're trying to push people. So where did I end up? Well, there was one more worth mentioning. There was two more worth mentioning. This was a one about from the Journal of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, about parents being encouraged to push their children to their limits and beyond their limits, and how that can be helpful as a buffer for anxiety in the future. Maybe that's beyond. But I ended back with J.S. Russell and the most recent paper I could find. And this wasn't talking about resilience, this was talking about striving. And I wonder whether what I'm conflating resilience with is actually what I mean here, is trying to get this idea of striving as a source of, as a human value, as a cardinal virtue. Now, Russell's stuff is all grounded in the Journal of Philosophy of Sport, but it is essentially philosophy. And he's suggesting that striving exists in unity with other virtues like resilience, and it's this idea of focusing on something that's pushing yourself towards a goal of some kind, and how sports and games are part of that human conditions. Fascinating paper, but again, that word comes up again, and it's striving in relation to meaningful goals and challenges, and that meaningfulness, I can't escape it. Same as I can't escape the word resilience. It's in there. So he's asking for evidence from the world of sport, but I wonder, is there evidence for striving within the field of education? Is there some research that could be done in the field of education? All right, breath. I'm still in a ball of wool. I'm still there. I've still got all of these things that I'm not making sense of. It's incomplete. It's not all there. And this is maybe where you come in, but I'm sticking them all together, and I'm ending up, I think, here somewhere. And so some of the conclusions that I've had from the literature is that human responses to trauma are going to vary. There are risk factors, there are protective factors. There's that if you expose people to stresses and then maybe give them opportunity to reflect on it, it might lead to growth. It might, and then, and it can be at a personal level, or it can be at a population or a health level. There's this idea in neurology of plasticity, of neurogenesis, and it's going to depend on individuals how they respond. And so consequently, we've got to think about scaling. We've got to think about appropriate goals. We've got to think about appropriate challenges. And moderately stressful events are going to help, but if it's not stressful enough, it's not going to do anything. It's not necessarily, no stress is going to lead to not a resilience building experience, and too much stress is going to overwhelm. And the philosophy stuff from Russell, sheltering people is futile, and it's more than just overcoming any old challenge. It's got to be seen as a meaningful challenge. That's for sure. And sports scientists want to measure everything, of course they do. But it's context specific is what I took from that literature quite a lot. And if we need to think about appropriate challenge, but also being trauma aware, and how do I marry those things? How do I teach teachers to marry those things together? Are they mutually exclusive things, or is there a way that perhaps I'm presenting this as a false dichotomy? So how's PE going to be helpful for building protective factors and combating stresses, and consequently make pupils better adapted for growth, which is what we're charged with by Russell within the philosophy. So I've got some ideas following on from this within the fields that I tried to push these things to, and maybe there's something here that floats your boat, or something you think you can help me with. Teachers' conceptions of micro stressing, how they go about doing it, their interpretations, their what they think resilience means at the moment. Maybe there's a sociological study to be done there. Within the outdoor ed instructors, when pupils from schools go to these outdoor ed centres, they're basically handed over. The teacher goes around with them, but it's the instructors who are having that impact. So maybe we need to have the voices of the instructors heard a little bit more. I think there's a model of practice to do with growth to be found within the PE literature. I think there's more to get at in terms of that challenge by choice within PE, and particularly within meaningful PE. And when is giving a choice to them the wrong choice? When actually do they need to be told, no, I know, you need to do this. And within the philosophical justification that Deirdre Cronin and Tim Fletcher gave most recently around meaningful PE, they said that's a central human value of feeling in control. You can't take that away from them. And I wonder, some of the experiences that I've had when I was teaching in a college, working with the army, is that there's something else going on when you're training squaddies. And how is there something that we can learn there that perhaps we can take into our practice, or is that completely out of it? So within sport, this idea of pushing your limits, this idea of these Tough Mudder races and these Spartan races that people participate in, and these challenges that they put themselves through, as well as definitions around change and transformation and metamorphosis and transformative pedagogy, which some of you may be better versed in than I am. Is there something that's metamorphic that we can do about pedagogy? Metamorphosis being like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. You're never going to be the same again. Is there some theory around that might be worth investigating, as well as this idea of striving? Okay. I feel like I've just unloaded my problems on you, my thoughts on you a little bit, and I think there's opportunity here for collaboration, which is desperately what I want, is desperately what I need. So it might be that you're listening to this and you're a practitioner, you have something to do with forest schools or businesses, or you're in the army, or you do Tough Mudder races or something like that. Collaborate with me, talk with me in your area of expertise, with your business, with your battalion. I've put with the army. I wonder whether there's something that we can do together, some research that we can do that might be mutually beneficial. It might be that you've got a degree, or you're doing a degree right now, and you want to do more, and maybe this is the field that you might be interested in. Then come and do a master's with me. Let's explore that together. Or it might be that in fact here you're the expert, you're the researcher, you're the psychologist, you're the outdoor ed expert, you're the sports scientist, or the philosopher, and you've seen what I'm talking about, and I may have missed something massive, and you might be able to help me. Help me. I'm just the shorts monkey, don't forget, there I am. And and how can we go about collaborating, perhaps cross-disciplined, in order to enhance both our understandings and how this might fit into my field, which is training teachers, but also within education more broadly. So within the chat, obviously I want to give people opportunity to ask questions and things like that, but within the chat there's a little form to fill in, which talks about the session, and if anything you found useful, anything I've missed, or anything where you think we might be able to collaborate. And I'll just grab that from the top of the chat now and stick it in again so it's there for you. So hold on a moment. So if you could find time to fill that in, I'd be really, really grateful, just to get some feedback on what you think. But that's it. I'm going to have a drink now and stop talking. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to turn on and listen to what you've got to say now. So thanks. I don't know whether Steve has managed to return from the depths of his meeting with the boss, but normally he would facilitate this, but I can facilitate myself. I'm not I don't need my hand holding. So if anyone wants to ask a question, if you want to use the raise hand function, or if you want to type something in the chat, I'm more than happy to try and do my best to answer it. But yeah.
Hi, Geth. Can I ask
Luke,
a question?
hi.
How are you doing? Thanks for that, mate. That was very good. I really enjoyed it. You covered an awful lot of ground there. I was just wondering about your thoughts on, models-based practice in PE and that idea of a models-based practice for outdoor ed. Is that something that you think has got legs? Has it got potential? Is it, something? And if so, how would you start to conceive it?
Yeah, thanks for asking something in my field. I appreciate that, Luke. I feel like I can answer that one. With the models of practice in PE, the models and practice literature, from PE's point of view, was very much Mike Metzeler's stuff, circa 2005, and he came up with these models for instruction, different from what's been proposed that I presented to you there from Williams and Wainwright, which is very much within that models of pedagogy, as in curriculum models, which is based on the work of Ennis and others, where they're making it specific to the context that you're teaching in. But Mike Metzeler's models of instruction, which for those of you that don't know about them, they are direct instruction, so Engelman and Rosenshine, that sort of thing, peer teaching, personalized system for learning, sport education, cooperative learning. And what they do is they give little blueprints of how teachers might look at a model that's worked elsewhere and see if that's the most applicable thing for their context and their curriculum and their situation. Now, the model being proposed by Williams and Wainwright, perhaps I could just skip back a moment. Williams and Wainwright is very much a curriculum model, and the model that I've come up with, which I didn't show you, but I've got down here as an additional slide, is more something that could be applied not just within outdoor ed, and there might be something in PE like a stretcher race, but the goal of it, you can see in the red there, would be very much, this isn't about a model that's necessarily going to lead to who's the fastest or anything like that. We're trying to just get them to do it, and then at the end they say something along the lines of, wow, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did that. And we need more of those moments, I think, within PE. But as I said before, I'm conscious of treading on I'm conscious of treading on the toes of Graham, who's our mate from Bangor, and I don't want him to I know he's doing his PhD based around the Williams and Wainwright model, which is a curriculum models, but I think there might be something to write that he could then contrast with, which is more of an instructional model rather than a curriculum model, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Luke? I don't know whether I'm...
Yeah, so that sounds good, Gath. Yeah.
Bless you. Really... Thanks, Luke. Bless you. There's one here from our Claire Christopher. Thank you. During a motorbike lesson, a teacher told me to go faster just before a 90-degree blind corner. Oh dear. Yeah, so that yeah, absolutely. So what I don't know if you can see the chat, as I think everybody can see the chat, but what our Claire Christopher's put in the chat is about on a motorbike lesson, which sounds fascinating, but on a turn, going too fast, pushing myself too far, and perhaps leading to trauma. And so this idea of being tentative about instructing someone to leave their comfort zone, so allowing the student to have some choice of challenge is a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. And most of the literature that we look at within the field says that. But my question is when is giving them the choice the wrong choice? And provided we can ensure, provided we, as teachers and educators and as people who care deeply about the people who we're teaching and instructing, is there perhaps sometimes a case to push them further in a safe way, in a trauma-aware way, or are those things incompatible? And I haven't got an answer. I haven't got an answer for that yet. I'm veering towards certainly what you're suggesting there, Claire Christopher, because that's the safer option. But sometimes perhaps is the best way to say it, is we end up in situations where we're too cautious And there's always the example I give when I do my health and safety lectures is the example of the head teacher who banned handstands at lunchtime for primary school pupils because there were too many accidents, rather than teaching them how to do handstands safely. And so the reaction sometimes is overly cautious and wrapping them in cotton wool, and we've got this idea within the PE literature which is called appropriate challenge, acceptable risk, and there's a continuum of how that works, and we very much want to keep everybody safe, that's for sure. There's two hands up. I think Richard, we were first with your hand up. If you'd like to turn on, please, Richard. Is that right? Thanks, Emma.
Oh, I'm halfway down the screen.
Hi, Richard.
I must have been dropping it there. I don't know if Emma's point continues on from what you were just saying. So if it does, Emma, if you want to jump in first, because mine's going off on a slightly different tangent.
Great.
Just give her a minute to respond.
No, it's fine. You go ahead.
All right. Thank you. I guess a very good whistle-stop tour of some of that resilience literature there, Gethin. So thanks for sharing that one. Something that sort of sprung to my mind around this is the whole sort of the value within education of developing resilience. And clearly it is valuable, but it's not necessarily something at the moment that is easily assessed or observed. And is that part of a challenge? And are you aware of people that are trying to overcome that challenge? I know sort of Guy Claxton has it within his building learning power of one of the 4 R's around resilience. But then what you presented raises the other major challenge of, well, everyone interprets resilience differently, from the sort of resilience of coping skills and we can recover from the challenges to the adapting and growing through those challenges. So I think there's a lot more discussion and research needs to go on within it, but I think it's a valuable point you're making, and to get people to come from all these different domains you've highlighted to start some of those discussions could be really valuable. Just to throw my other one in there, when we discuss it with our students, particularly within the sport and PE fields, as well as the outdoors that I work in, we use the term anti-fragility. So Nassim Taleb's interpretation of it, because it begins the discussions on, so if we're talking about anti-fragility, so then what is fragile as the total opposite, and resilience sort of floats within the middle, or more in that middle area towards that anti-fragility, but it just gives them another slightly more abstract concept, but then go, oh, I get it now. So if fragility is something that, you know, we break easily under pressure, anti-fragility is the opposite, we grow under pressure. It's that whole range of things. But I think getting some, you know, do we ever get unified definitions on anything? But having a bit of a clearer focus on what things are, and then maybe some sort of ability to assess it, much as I hate assessment in education, but it maybe gives some of the powers that be that little bit more, all right, okay, so there is a value in this, we can measure it, we can see it, and maybe we take it a bit more seriously within. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on there.
Well, yeah, I have as you can see, I've got lots of thoughts on that. But maybe the key things to pick out from, and thank you for contributing. It's interesting to hear how you guys go about talking about fragility. I think that's really interesting. But the reality is that within schools, they've got it in their vision statements. They've got this: we're going to make these children resilient. This is going to happen, you know. And I was looking yesterday at I was in a seminar yesterday with the AFP guys and the Association for Physical Education, and they had it built into some of the models and the acronyms and the visions that they were putting forward as well. And it's maybe this is why it interests me, because I'm interested in the growth bit, I think.
Yeah,
like most educators, I'm interested in the growth bit. Is how can I set up situations? How can I facilitate things that are going to allow individuals to be their best selves? And that's where maybe I'm drawn to the Russell stuff on it being virtuous as being something to strive and striving and for that sort of thing. So yeah, apologies, I'm not making fun when I say the sports scientists like to measure everything, but yeah, it's true. They're looking for a measure, and I think there's qualitative measures that we can get at. We can take it from groups of particular groups of people's perspectives, like sports scientists have done with athletes already. But I don't know whether I'm answering your question or not. But I think it'd be interesting to talk more about it. I think, Richard, I'd like to.
It's those elements within education. I spent a number of years as a primary school teacher, and one of the reasons I left was the overemphasis on test scores, but it was always how well are they doing in maths and English, and science, because that's the other one that we get in SATs. And yeah, we can test some of the other things, but it was always about that, academic understand. Well, a lot of it wasn't even understanding what have they learned in terms of what memory. What can they store in here as facts and residual memories, and then apply some of it in my next book? Well, hold on, this whole concept of resilience in terms of preparing for a life skill that you're going to go on to, and absolutely, I fully agree, it's something that we should strive for, and every child should be able to develop it. But if it's not measured in schools, is it something that's therefore not valued as much? And I'm the same. I don't overly like measuring things, but is it, sometimes it's something we have to do to try and raise the value of it, rather than it just being the lip service paid to it, because that it's not a new thing necessarily, resilience either, is it? It's come under different guises, but it's been around for a long time, but we still seem to just be talking around it, or there's individuals within certain schools, or sometimes it's the whole school approach, but it's not mainstream yet necessarily, certainly from my experience.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Yeah, really interesting. Perhaps a conversation for us to carry on again another time. Yeah,
for sure, Gethin. Yeah.
Emma, hi.
Yeah, I was just thanks for that, Gethin. I was just sharing some background and stuff, if it helps, really, from what you said, because you said about the areas that you're not strong in. So I work in NHS in mental health, severe secondary mental health with adults, but we're getting a lot of 18, 19-year-olds and up. And we do teach, like you say, we teach resilience. I've got a course I teach from stress to strength, and we teach mindfulness, dialectical behavioural therapy, emotional regulation skills and things like that to try and build resilience in people. But I'm also doing a master's in psychology at Chester, where I work in recovery focused mental health areas. So we're looking at people that are high risk trauma, a lot of them from bullying and negative school events, funnily enough, negative school experiences, which has left them with these traumas and things. So what we try and do is what I've seen in protective factors, meaningful experiences have been around a long time in psychology. So it's logotherapy, with Viktor Frankl, when he was in the war, in the prisoner of war camps and stuff like that. So that's really, sort of old. But the result. So I'm doing a study in the masters as well, because the mindset side. So what I have seen, I was a teacher as well, but what I've seen on the ground with people that I teach is the ones that recover are more likely to recover and adapt and cope with mental health difficulties. Are the ones that I think have got that growth mindset, have got that resilience. And also in sports, there's mental toughness that is measured. So I've just launched and got ethics approval for a research study into is mindset, resilience and mental toughness. It's a personality attribute or characteristics in psychology terms, as opposed to a virtue.
Mm.
So it's seen as a trait instead of a state.
Yeah.
So it's more of a characteristic or an attribute. It could be related to a personality attribute. So we're looking at that in terms of, is it a core predictor of mental health and well-being?
Mm-hmm.
But what I found, just like you, is when I researched all the literature, it is shocking. The resilience literature in psychology is conceptually it crosses different areas. There's no clear definition. So I think, from what I've seen, you have to state what you feel your definition is and stick to that and go about it. But I'm using the Connor Davidson resilience scale, the 10-item scale, as Richard was on about measuring. It's a very simple scale. It's got very good psychometric properties, etc., etc. But what I am finding is there was a big overlap between mindset, the conceptual and theoretical overlap between characteristics identified, personal virtues, whatever you want to put it, in mindset, in resilience, and in mental toughness. And there is not a clear distinction between either. So I'm going to try and do a factor analysis on that to see if there's any, if there's a clustering, if because there's an overlap, because it's really poor, isn't it, that you're left trying to teach resilience when actually, personally, I like the bounce back definition and it's very different to what you're talking about.
Yeah, the bounce back is the dictionary definition, but it's because I got caught up, I think, in the virtuous philosophy stuff. Then I think perhaps in terms of measuring, which is what you're going to do, if you keep the definition to a trait, a trait or something or like that, and then you could do bounce beyond rather than bounce back as your metaphor perhaps for it. I don't know, is rather than bouncing back in how you measure it, they're bouncing beyond because they've become better for that experience of
I think this is what I found out to clarify, was actually that you've got to narrow it down and pin it down if you're going to start measuring it theoretically and conceptually, because people aren't doing that. And then there's trying to mix it and blend it in with what you're saying. Resilience, as far as a skill or a teachable skill, and genetically some people are born with an element of resilience, but you can also grow it as a skill, and that's what research says. But it's defining people's ability to adapt and bounce back, but not necessarily grow, and that would be seen as another completely different concept to resilience. And I think that's where they need researchers. Would be great if they could just sort of clarify and put some boundaries in to give teachers a chance, on, because I tell you, it's very different in mental health and when you're dealing with trauma, etc. Is that people being able to cope and be able to come back and live with long-term conditions or traumas and things is very different to people growing from them and bouncing back from them. They're not the same thing at all.
Yeah, I found. So speaking of the scale that you've put on, I found lots of different scales when I was looking at it. There are quite a few out there, aren't there? You'll probably know this a lot better than me.
Yeah, I had to look at, because I had to investigate the psychometric properties of the different scales, and also the different scales. Like one of them in Norway is really into the social aspect of resilience. Now I've stayed away from that because not every individual child or person has got a social network. And what I was trying to focus on, it's an innate attribute, a trait in that person. And it's got to be an internal intrinsic, like you say, a virtue or characteristic. It's not got to be socially related. So I think you really need to tie yourself down, don't you, on how you want to frame it. I
think maybe did you say you used to be a teacher as well, Emma?
Yeah, I did, design and technology. So I know what it's like to be in the staff room and being, oh, don't be off ill because I'm not, and I was metal and I was a female doing metal engineering and plastics and the staff room were like, don't for God's sake be ill because I'm not coming in that workshop. I'm not teaching anything. I'm not covering your lesson.
But I think it's interesting because if it's going to be in vision statements, if it's going to be in documents that schools are putting out as this is what we're going to do for your child. We need and we're thinking about it as something that's not a virtue and something that we can measure, which is what's as was being alluded to earlier, that it needs to be something that we can measure so that we can prove that we're doing it. Well, I wonder whether actually just and this is one of the ideas that you can see there that's probably a sociological study rather than a psychological one, which is how do teachers make sense of that term now?
I think that's the biggest. I think that's got to be your definition as your starting point for everything.
Yeah.
Psychology, whatever science is, it's about that definition and how you can stick it in vision statements for poor teachers to sort of work it out when the research body hasn't got a clue. It hasn't in psychology anyway. It's not really fair on teachers, is it?
Yeah. Oh, Becky, you got your hand up. Do you want to come in there, Becky? Thank you, Emma.
No worries.
Oh, it's Alex. Sorry, it's the surname.
Yeah, no worries.
Is it? Sorry, yes, that seems to make sense now.
That's my surname. And I was going to follow up from Emma because that's the question I had. Is do you think even the term is a helpful term within schools? And I'm teacher educator, my first year actually as a teacher educator in PE, and I'm not so sure how helpful the term resilience is if we want to help children become more resilient in our subject. Whereas maybe we should be talking about coping skills or certain things that they can implement that we can then, because you were talking about creating tasks or environments to test them or challenge them. So we give them tools and we create environments and we help them test those tools and tweak those tools so they work for them. And I think the talk about, well, I'm answering my own question, which I apologize.
No, go ahead.
Resilience takes us away from having those conversations, I feel. And perhaps we need to, Do you think it's a good term if we want to help children become more resilient?
I wonder if the goal is resilience, then maybe it's a bit like growth mindsets, and it's what people have said about growth mindsets is that if the goal is to have a growth mindset, sometimes the best thing you can do is not mention it. And so I wonder the same thing with resilience is we want people to be resilient, and we want to give them opportunities to try and develop that. But the way to get at resilience is not by doing things like as you described. Maybe the way to get at resilience is to give them the tools like cognitive behavioral therapy, like mindfulness training, like trauma aware training. And so I don't know is the answer. I don't know whether it's something that we should not, whether it's a term that's helpful. Maybe like I said at the end of the lecture, is that striving might be better. That idea of find something that you find meaningful and strive towards that goal, and that's challenge, and that's goal setting. I don't know if you want to come back, Alex.
Well, I think goal setting is something that we can teach children that is relatively generic enough that we can do across subjects and then make it subject or context specific. So goal setting in French or goal setting in PE can be done, but it'll be contextual, and that can help children develop resilience, whatever resilience, or help children to strive to become better in that. I think that might be a better way forward, a set of tools, although that maybe not the right word either, that can be across in a whole school approach. Because if it's left to PE or extracurricular or outdoor education, I'm not sure we're going to have the impact potentially that we would like to have.
Yeah, I mean, lots of the trainees I work with in ITE are primary trainees predominantly, and so consequently, in any room, and you could probably apply this to any room of people. You ask them who's had a good experience of PE and who's had a bad experience of PE in school. It's about 50-50 good and bad. It's like Marmite almost, and Yeah, I mean, I completely take completely take your point on board that maybe PE isn't the best place to do it. Maybe it is elsewhere, but within Wales, of course, they're moving to an area of learning and experience, and the some of the ways that schools are restructuring is that lots of what would happen in old PSE, PSHE is now becoming the responsibility of the PE staff. And so in Wales, it might be the case that that's the way it's going. It might not, but you know, it's I don't think I've got an answer for the comment, Alex. But it's I find it really interesting of what is going to happen, and consequently, is there some research to be done to capture what's going on? I wonder whether that's the case. Yeah. Georgia, you got your hand up. I know you've put some things in the chat, Georgia. Apologies, but just turn on and have a chat. It's much better that way.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was just writing down the ideas while they were in my head. Otherwise, you get caught up in the chat. And at the moment, I've got another one. And when we're in school, so I've done my primary education degree. I'm going into teaching. I'm doing a psychology master's. This is where I'm going with everything, EP route. Mm-hmm. We're talking about resilience, and there's resilience in school. Now, can you have resilience across the subjects and the goal setting and the striving? But will that have any effect if they don't have any resilience as a character, any self-belief and self-motivation to be resilient in their life? Can you teach it in school, and can it start with the subjects, or have you got to flip it?
Good.
Can they learn that skill, and can they self-apply it?
Yeah, great question. And from the research that I did, again, this is me going down the rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. That some of them were saying that it was context specific, which means the answer to the question would be no, you can't. And others were saying actually there's things that are going on which are transferable. That if we, for example, if we play games with them within PE, where things go a little bit wrong. And they learn some coping strategies for cooperative games, and how to communicate with each other, and how to get along with each other, and how to participate together. Will that then help them transfer that in other situations where they come across similar types of adversity?
You'd hope so. That's the policy, isn't it? But then if you've only got a PE teacher that really invests in this, that really pushes this for PE, what happens when it is just lip service in the policy, and you've got different teachers engaging with even growth mindset? You can tell when teachers are really invested in this, and you can tell when they get it and they're trying this and they're trying that, and you can tell when the other ones just use the words as a way to get the kids to behave.
And the test perhaps for schools is if they've got the word resilience in their vision statement, is okay, you've put this in there, so if I go and ask your staff about it, what are they going to say? And how are they implementing that? And I wonder whether there's it's in the national curriculum documentation. In this case, specifically in England, it's in the English section subject area, and it's in the relationships and sex education new document that's out. So I'd expect to see it in those areas, perhaps. And in Wales, it's linked really heavily with the areas of learning and experience, but also the what matters statements, which is the overall vision for what the curriculum is meant to be all about. So schools in Wales are going to have an answer for that. I haven't got one.
We really need some what matters going in, because I feel like even though we're moving away and we're moving into well-being and things, it's so academically driven that I'm seeing so many children base their abilities on their scores and on their results. How do you move away from that, even from, say, now in high school? How do you unravel that? Or do we just start with the next generation again?
I think we're
positioned to have this measurable result. I'm good because I've got this score. I can show people I've done this. How do you break the resilience when you don't get those results?
You can't. The answer is you probably can't, and it's a constant. And earlier, I don't know if you remember earlier on in the lecture, they were talking about advocating for policies. I think it was Southwick. They were advocating for policies that will remove the most detrimental things that are stopping people from being resilient, which is the socioeconomic factors and the biopsychological stuff. which is essentially, lots of pupils from poorer backgrounds, and so they're talking about it in terms of policy, and again, but is it, as you say in your comments, is it lip service? And arguably it is, and as tragic and as sad as that is to say. So sorry, I can't fix the education system in.
It's a question. You've trained me, and I'm
yes,
training.
I remember.
It's just something to take forward, just to embed in my own practice.
Yeah, absolutely, and and good luck, with what with the course that you're doing now. I'm sure they've gained an excellent student, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. I don't think there are any more hands up or any more questions. But just to say thank you very much for staying and chatting, and thank you very much for listening, and hopefully I've not what's the right word here? I've not done myself too much injustice with going outside of my own comfort zone with this. But if you haven't had a chance and there's opportunity you think to collaborate, then please just do the Google form for me, and I'd love to hear what you have to think about it anyway, everybody. So yeah, thank you for listening, and yeah, I'll see you. Hopefully, see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Really informative.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.